I want to welcome everyone to tonight's virtual panel, Autism Awareness Strategies for Educators and Parents. As you know, this is sponsored by NJAMLE, a group that's near and dear to my heart. This is the first episode of our Hungry for Learning series of offerings for this year, 2021. I'm your host, Joe Pizzo, and our panel is a wonderful panel this evening. We're very blessed. We have fellow educators, Dr. Mary Beth Edmonds and Michelle Vinokuroff. This panel is designed to raise awareness among us educators and parents who wish to learn more about effective strategies for dealing with autism in our schools and in our homes as well. Now, I'd like to begin with our first guest, Dr. Mary Beth Edmonds, who is a student-centered administrator. Now, that's said about a lot of people, but Mary Beth not only talks it, she walks it. She demonstrates exceptional leadership through high levels of student achievement, professional development, and the mentorship of aspiring school leaders. She began her career as a secondary English teacher, and that was prior to taking on roles as a central office director. At the present time, she is the principal of Monmouth Junction Elementary School in central New Jersey. And just a little side note, she and I share a love of poetry. Dr. Edmonds holds degrees from Montclair State University, the College of New Jersey, my alma mater, and Seton Hall University, where she earned her doctorate in educational leadership, management, and policy. She's a forward-thinking educator committed to improving instruction for every child, in every class, on every day. Welcome, Dr. Edmonds.
Thank you, Mr. Pizzo. I appreciate the wonderful introduction, and I'm delighted to be here. Really, it's a privilege. And I just want to let everybody know I taught 7th grade for 10 years. So
you've paid your dues. Before I begin with our first question, there's something I'd like to add to that introduction. Dr. Edmonds is not only an outstanding educator, but she's also the parent of a fine young man who is autistic. So my first question to you then is, when did you first realize that your son, Carl Ross, was experiencing some challenges?
Well, let's talk about it. At the very beginning, when he cried every night and wouldn't go to sleep, I worried, why isn't my child calming down and going to sleep at night? And I would certainly tell this to the pediatrician, and he would say, well, your baby's colicky. Let's give your baby drops at night. And of course, that helped for a little bit, but my child really never slept through the night. Actually, he didn't sleep through the night until he was 4.5. So I did start to worry more when he didn't develop language, when other babies of similar ages were starting to talk and make their first sentences and call mommy and daddy. I started to worry that why isn't he hitting these milestones the way he should be? So I would mention that, of course, to the pediatrician, because I was religious about going for his shots and his checkups and making sure he was eating the right food and the formula and so on. And the pediatrician just told me, don't worry about it. It'll all be okay. And sometimes boys develop a little bit slower than girls do, etc. So I tried to put it out of my mind, but it was always in the back of my mind when I'd be up 2, 3, 4 times a night, trying to calm a very upset child. So it wasn't until he cried for 4 hours straight, and I thought maybe he had was having some kind of an attack of some sorts. I brought him to the hospital because I was just frantic. I mean, why is the child crying? And that was the first time that someone said to me, did anyone ever talk to you about autism? And I just sat across from this psychologist, stunned, because I had heard the word autism in a college course, maybe in a child psychology course, I might have had a paragraph about it. But to have that word mentioned to me in a meeting was really something that set me back. So by that point, he was close to 3 o'clock, and 3 o'clock, excuse me, 3 years old. And that's when I knew we were really in trouble. At that point, I knew we had to seek help because this was beyond just a developmental delay.
When you moved into the school system with Carl Ross, uh, how did the process begin there to address his needs?
Well, because I'm an educator, I knew that schools should be taking children who are handicapped starting at the age of 3. So I launched that process myself. And I went to the school district, called the Board of Education to say, I want to arrange a meeting with your child's study team because now I have a diagnosis, et cetera. And they put me off for a little while because they said, well, school doesn't start until September and your son is 3, but we don't have to start him yet. So I started with barriers right from the get-go, right from the get-go. And I had to bring him to the school to be assessed. And then I had to go for the first IEP meeting where they were going to share the results. And I'll never forget this, Joe, the first thing the school psychologist said to me was, your child flunked his first Stanford Binet. That's how they opened up the meeting.
That can't be very reassuring.
No, that's how they opened up the meeting. And of course, this is my child, this is my baby. And regardless of what or how, and I don't know if he thought it was funny. I still am not sure if he thought that was going to make me feel reassured, but we did have a very rocky start. And because my son couldn't focus or concentrate or respond, they couldn't get an IQ on him. They couldn't get any real data. So they put him in a multiply handicapped class because they really didn't have autism classes at that time. This was 1980, just 1986. And so at that point, the rate of autism was about 1 in 15,000. So most people hadn't even seen autistic children yet. This was very early on in the history of autism in New Jersey. So they really didn't know what to do with him. And so I had to do my own research to find places that would solely focus on autism.
Now, I know that the journey is difficult. What does that journey look like for a parent and for a child from that diagnosis to the classification and to the eventual arrival at middle school and beyond?
Well, in my case, my husband and I had to do a lot of the legwork because the school district at that time was basically interested in the placement and putting him in the multiply disabled class and not really having a good understanding of what his needs were. In other words, they were equating the child and the needs with the placement. So your child goes here and therefore everything should be okay. And I didn't accept that. I didn't accept that a multiply handicapped placement where a teacher is trying to manage children with Down syndrome and children who are emotionally disturbed, et cetera. I didn't think they could deal with his autism. So that's when I found it's called Autism New Jersey Today. And I started taking courses and I stumbled on applied behavioral analysis because Eva, trying to think of his first name, his last name is Lovas, was doing work in California on applied behavioral analysis. And I knew that I had to find a school or find practitioners who understood ABA in order to teach him. So that's when I found Rutgers, the Douglas Developmental Disability Center, and we were able to get Carl Ross into that program or when he was about 4.
Now, raising an autistic child has to be a bit of a challenge, I would think, for any parent. So, what was your greatest challenge, and has that challenge changed any over the years as Carl Ross has gotten older?
Greatest challenge. Well, I think the greatest challenge was not accepting people's ideas of what he could and could not do. In other words, to have neurologists say, well, he's never going to have friends and he's never going to do this. And so there was a very closed-minded approach. And I think people did it with the best of intention. I think people were saying that, because professionals would tell me right to my face, you're in denial. And I'm saying, no, he's going to get better. You don't understand. He's going to improve. If we work on this, he's going to get much better. And I had somebody say to me, you're in denial. This is autism. He's probably never going to speak, and so on. And I think the biggest challenge was trying to push out what people would say about what his options were. And so, you just have to push forward. And if there's any parent on this call tonight that's had someone talk about his or her child in a limiting fashion, I would say ignore it and have belief in your child and just don't give up in that belief.
Most of the advances seem to be done in a lot of challenges with people who would not take no for an answer, who wouldn't quit. And I've met Carl Ross, and I can tell you that the word resilience comes to mind right away. I was with him 5 seconds, and I could tell you this kid's resilient, and if he's nothing else, he's resilient. Let me go to our last question for this round. Is the advice that's given to parents today different than that which was being given to you back when Carl Ross was first diagnosed as being autistic?
Well, here's what I think there's a lot different. In the 1980s, when people really didn't know much about autism, they sent me, not my husband, they sent me for counseling. They said part of the reason why your son is not talking and not behaving and not learning is because of you. This is the refrigerator parent. So I don't think they speak to parents that way anymore. I hope they don't. I think the advice to parents today is still limiting in the sense that, and I don't mean to be disrespectful in any way, but the placement is not the be all and end all for the child. In other words, it's the place, you have to get the right placement, but then you have to have teachers who are skilled and who know how to take the data and work with your child and move forward so that the child makes progress. So I think that advice is probably still the same. I think people are more accepting of autism in the school districts now. They're more aware of it, obviously, because there's so many children who are being diagnosed with autism. So I see a vast difference with that. I still don't know if people believe that autistic children can reach high levels of achievement. I'm still not sure on that. So I don't know if they could get the behaviors under control. I think children can learn. So that I would think is different.
maybe that journey, then we can all begin by taking that first step
Mhm.
and trying to be a little more understanding.
I think the other thing too, Joe, and I'll leave it because I know you're going to move on to Michelle. I'm not sure parents understand that they're just as important a team member on the IEP team as all the specialists who are on that team. I think sometimes parents are on a receiving end and they feel, well, I have all these experts around the table and what do I have to offer? And we have to remind parents that they're the child's first teacher. They know the child the best, and they bring absolute good knowledge and the expertise of being the parent to the table. So I think if we could encourage parents to participate as equal partners, that there might be more understanding and investment in that IEP meeting.
It's an excellent point. I'm going to move on now to Michelle. Our second panelist, Michelle Vinokurov, is an amazing young lady. She's a young adult who was diagnosed with autism at the age of 2. She was nonverbal until the age of 6. At 22 years old, her life story was released in a published book called This is Autism. Today, Michelle works as a paraprofessional for elementary school students living with autism in Middletown Township Public School District. She was recently awarded as Best Support Staff of the school year 2020-2021. She, along with Dr. Edmonds and I, is a member of the New Jersey Autism Think Tank. She is presently pursuing her bachelor's degree in the science of psychology, applied behavioral analysis through Purdue University Global. And I have to make sure that I finish her interview, her time in a reasonable amount of time, because her first class is at 8 o'clock tonight and she needs to get ready for that. So Michelle, welcome. Thank you for being with us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me on, Mr. Pizzo. It feels very honorable. Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, let me ask you to start off, when did you first know about your autism?
So for me, I was diagnosed at the age of 2, but I didn't personally know that I was autistic until I was in 6th grade. So it was at my family friend's house one day. And my family and I went over to my family friend's house and we were watching a documentary about Dr. Temple Grandin. And that was from that documentary from there. While watching it, she was a very interesting lady. And I'm like, huh. And my parents were explaining to me after we were watching the documentary that I'm very similar to this woman. Like, they didn't directly say that I'm autistic, but like they were pretty much telling me about how I was thinking in ways like she does, and like how like sometimes I think very visually, and also that the way that I communicate in details and everything. So that was when I realized that, yes, I think differently in the world, like that the way that I perceive things is different than most people do in the world, but that doesn't make me different than from everybody else.
Good point. Now, we all know that middle school students sometimes can say things and not realize that their comments can be hurtful. So my question to you would be, how did the other students treat you, especially when you were in middle school?
So, as I was saying before, like middle school was the time that, like, for me, I was just still learning about that I'm autistic and that I do think differently than a lot of people do. But also at the same time, middle school is that time where everybody's going through development as well. As you know, there's so many changes that are going on for kids in middle school. So everybody's all going through that, not just myself at that time, but everybody else is too. So they don't even realize yeah, like there's people that I'll give an example. Like, it wasn't really like comments, but I'll say that like there are times where, like, in my classrooms, because at the time I was like in resource classrooms and it was in 6th grade, and I've had people that they knew that I was very smart in the class. So like there's been times where I felt like people were kind of using me because for how smart I am, but I like knew that I'm focused with learning, and I always loved school. So
Now, when you were in middle school, the fact that you love learning, I'm sure helped you, but what other things helped you to learn more efficiently?
So other things that helped me, like one of the things with organization, like just having a schedule of what my classes are for the day and stuff. And also the key thing is that in my middle school years, I was involved in my individualized education plan meetings with my parents. So it's different, and I'll tell you this is that it is different for everybody. So it depends about with the child or the student themselves, if appropriate that they can be involved in the meetings. But I was involved in my own meetings, and I've learned over time that as I was progressing in my classes throughout my school years, like by the time I was in 8th grade, I was mainstreaming in almost every class in general ed. So, and I was still getting the special education services, such as with sitting in front of the classroom. So that way I could focus, and also getting extra notes, getting extended time on exams, or just having the extra help from the special education teacher when there would be a general education teacher with a special education teacher. So all these things, they would help me out so much. And I hope this will be a good note for all educators, that to focus on those things, because that will definitely help in the long run.
I couldn't agree with you more. There are things I still need help with, and boy, I enjoy it when someone helps me out. Now, were there any things that slowed down your learning in any way?
I guess in a way, when I was first starting off with transitioning into general education classrooms in 8th grade, were that the class sizes for me were very distracting. So you got more people that are in the classroom, which means more noises, more distractions. So it definitely was not easy for me at first in the beginning with that. But this is where it was very important that like such as the special education teacher in the classroom, along with the general ed teacher, but more of the special education teacher, like they focused on knowing like what's best for me, and paying attention that like observing to see like I was having a hard time with like just with everybody around me. So either like we tried different ways, like either for me to be in the back, where in the back part, so that way the students up would be like up front and they would not bother me too much, so I could still hear, but that way I had like a quiet space too at the same time. Or this is more of the better way that works for me, was being in the front of the classroom in the corner, the front corner, right by my teacher's desk, the general education teacher's desk. So that way they got to focus on me, and that way everybody else is in the back of me, and that would eliminate as much noise as possible. And that way I can also see my notes, because my vision was starting to get really bad at that time. So that helped me out a lot.
That sounds the same as making an accommodation for someone who maybe is in a cast on their leg, and so you put them up near the front of the room, or you put them closer to the door, so the entrance and exit is easier for them. Yeah, that's very good. Now, as an adult with autism, is there a big challenge that you have to overcome even today?
The big challenge for me today would pretty much still be about, in a way, it would still be about what changes, because yeah, there's a lot of unexpectation, like there's a lot of things that you don't expect, like especially like what's been going on with this school year. You get like you go from transitioning to virtual learning, then like going back in person and back and forth and back and forth, and I'm like, wow, this is getting very overwhelming for me. And I'll be honest with you, yeah, it kind of has gotten overwhelming at times. But you know, I've learned through my job today that, you know what, you just gotta go with the flow of it. You know, and I know this for myself, that I still got my routine, that if I gotta work, I gotta work. If I know that I'm gonna be online, then I know that I'm gonna be online for the day. Which, by the way, what's great about with Middletown is that, like, they got paraprofessionals like myself that were involved online with the students. So I tell you right now, I'm glad that they do that. So with those changes, you know, it does take time to teach that to an individual with autism. It takes patience and everything to go through those changes. But it used to be a lot worse for me as a little girl, but over time, I've felt like I've overcome a lot with that.
So it sounds like being patient and being willing to reach out to your students not only helps you, but it helps the whole class as well. That's a good strategy for everyone, no matter what your ability happens to be at the time. Final question for you, and this is a two-parter. First of all, what advice can you give to those parents who are raising an autistic child and those educators who have autistic students in the classroom?
So my advice, and this is the key thing that I keep hearing on throughout the night and stuff, because especially what Dr. Maribeth said, she was saying about with how with parents about with being more involved with collaborating with the child study team. And I think that is so important, where collaboration together from the home environment and the school environment will bring such a difference of with progress in with any child or student that is on the spectrum. You know, just you have to collaborate, communicate, just be patient. I know that with every individual, it does take time for growth to come, but there is growth, and the child will eventually reach their most potential independent life. It doesn't matter like where they're at in terms of language. It doesn't matter where they're at in terms of life skills. The goal for any child is to get to where they will be their best potential self. So this is the same advice for for both parents and educators that I just want to bring out. Just pay attention to the child.
Now, what advice would you give to the child or to the adult dealing with autism?
So my advice is that remember that you are a gift in your own way. You know that even though you have autism, just know that like there are so much about you that is about you, as your personality, your talents, your strengths, everything. It's, you know, there's a reason why you are you for a reason.
That's deep. That's very philosophical. Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, you don't have to run right now. You're welcome to stay, but whenever you have to run, don't hesitate. I know you do have a class coming up, so whenever that time is, feel free to just excuse yourself. Okay. We have a special guest in the audience tonight, and that's a young lady with whom I work. She's our ESL teacher at the Black River Middle School in Chester. That's Lauren Marianino. And Lauren has a fairly extensive background in dealing with students with autism. And she also is an amazing ESL teacher. I've seen her work with some of my students, and I'm just in awe of the things that she can get them to do. So, Lauren, let me ask you, what do you see as the greatest challenge for an ESL teacher who's working with a student who is also autistic? And is there a key to your approach? Now, do we have Lauren up on mic?
Hi, Joe.
Okay, there we go.
I am present. Well, thank you for asking. And basically, I find that the greatest challenge an ESL teacher who's teaching a student who is also autistic is finding an effective form of communication that works for their student. So I think it's really important to keep in mind that communication can occur verbally or using assistive technology, text, or even sign language. To me, you need to make sure that you're reaching out to that student, you're finding a method that works for them, because maybe the method that you're used to isn't working for them. And, I've found that before, and I'm like, hold on, well, this might work for me, but I need to take a step back and say to myself, what will work best for the student, and putting their needs before my own. And I have personally found that using visual aids is so essential, whether that be using, PECs, which, just in case anyone is not familiar, this is something I actually had made, although I believe it is backwards on everyone else's screen. The use of, pictures and words like "I want a," and then the individual would choose what their option is. And, another great thing could be the use of a visual schedule, visual instructions, and incorporating pictures helps individuals make connections between what is being either communicated verbally or through pictures. The use of REALA, which is like pictures of real objects, is also another, I think, great thing that helps, individuals make connection between either the spoken or the written word. And I think it is also imperative that the teacher, makes sure that you are using things that the student is interested in. So if you know that your student really likes cars, then maybe you want to do a social story that somehow involves, the use of cars. Or if, someone really likes unicorns, have a visual schedule of what the school day is with unicorns throughout. It's making that connection and the use of pictures. That's what I have found to be most, effective for my students that I've worked with throughout the years.
Thank you, Lauren. We have 2 questions in the chat, and I'm going to leapfrog one because this question is for Michelle. It says, if you had a chance to lay it out yourself, what skills and/or accommodations would you suggest you need before you entered the Gen Ed class?
So what skills and accommodations? Those are really good questions. So I know for me that it was always important for me that I was pretty much in the front of the classroom, because that way I am attentive and focused. That way the teacher was always able to see me, and that way if I ever need help with anything, which, by the way, that was always a hard thing for me throughout my school years, was that asking for help. So my teachers would be able to help me if I ever need help with things, and would encourage me to ask questions and stuff for whatever I was confused about. Which this where it's important about with self-advocacy skills, which I've learned that over the years because of my school years, that were with asking for help and understanding what's important to me and what my needs are and wants are and everything, especially when it came in school. So for me, just knowing, especially as well with the note taking, when I was going into Gen Ed, I knew that I was going to need a little more support when it came to keeping up with notes and everything, because it was a different kind of environment where it was faster pace, and we're following the regular curriculum and everything. So that was another accommodation that was provided for me. And that's just advice for any parents, that if you have a child that's going to in Gen Ed classrooms, I recommend it because it can help while letting the child be in the regular classroom.
That question was from Denise. Thank you so much, Denise. That was an excellent question. There's one from Erica also I'd like to go to. This is for anyone on the panel. Do you have any advice for helping students in a virtual setting? That's very timely.
Wow, that's a very good question. So I've actually had experiences myself for providing DTT to students one-on-one, and my advice is that I've used technology such as with Google Jamboard when it came to with using like for reinforcement systems such as with token boards. You know, that I have some students that are very motivated by having a reward system with getting stars, like 5 stars in a row. They would end up being rewarded with this, and that would keep them motivated based on what kind of preferred item that they wanted to earn at the end, or like what award they wanted to earn at the end. So like the types of activities, I would create them on Google Jamboard, or I would use through my classroom teacher, I would use boom cards. That's a very popular thing to use for in special education classrooms, or even any classrooms in general, to be honest, because there's a lot of fun ways to get creative with boom cards. So
you know a lot. This is wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
yeah.
Laura, Beth, anything to add?
I just wanted to jump in because my son, of course, is at home. He's in a congregate setting and he's not permitted to go to his program. So his program has had to be over virtual. So even though he doesn't have the skill level or the abilities that Michelle has, they've been trying to continue his speech program over the screen. They've had no choice. So it started with 2 or 3 minutes being on the screen, and there really wasn't a specific reward system. I mean, they've kind of, he's 37 now, so he's not earning tokens anymore, but he's now up to about 10 to 15 minutes on the screen. Now that's a year. You think about that March, we're going into a year. So if you have, I think what Michelle said earlier, it takes time. It really does take time. But there are moments when we're talking over FaceTime because I'm not able to see him physically. We're only able to wave. Like all of a sudden he's got some conversational skills that he didn't have in March. But no one it was a low demand kind of arrangement for his speech. So he had speech 3 times a week over the screen, but they started like just 2 or 3 minutes, and now they've built up to the 15 minutes. So I think the advice is not to give up, to have, low demand, high interest, and give it time to grow.
We're pushing the clock just a little bit. So what I'm going to do is we have contact information for our 2 panelists and for me if you wish to reach out. We also have some resources for you. I'm going to go ahead and copy those into the chat, and you can take those as you wish.
Great, thank you. Oh, go ahead.
While you're doing that, I'm just going to, if I may, pull this to a close and then turn it over to Christina, because we'd like to tell you a little bit about what NJAMLE has for you in the future. If you enjoyed this, you're going to enjoy our other programs as well. So if I may, I'm going to just wrap this up and then turn it back over to you, Christina.
Go right ahead.
Thank you. I want to thank everybody for your participation in tonight's program. As you can see, this is one of the finest panels I think we could put together. The folks here are not just giving you theory, they're giving you practice. They're living this every day. And that's the difference that we say at NJAMLE, that we like people who are actually doing what they're preaching and trying to tell you to do. So thank you to NJAMLE for sponsoring this year's first episode of Hungry for Learning. We've done this in the past, and this kicks off our new year. For more information about our future offerings, we have a website, njamle.org. Follow us on Twitter at NJAMLE. I'm at Prof. J. Pizzo, as you can see in the material that I posted. Before we bring this to a close, I'd like to leave you with 2 quotes, because I think these are 2 quotes to really think about. You heard Michelle mention Temple Grandin. And I found a quote by Temple Grandin that I think pretty much puts things into perspective. Temple Grandin gives us a quote that I think just crosses all boundaries and applies to every child, every adult, and everyone you'll ever come across. She's a powerful spokesperson for the autistic community, as you know, and Dr. Temple Grandin observes that there needs to be more emphasis on what a child can do instead of what he cannot do. There's also an author and spokesperson for the autistic community, Ellen Nottbaum. And she makes a statement that gives perspective from the point of view of someone who is autistic. So she speaks on behalf of someone with autism. And she says, patience, patience, patience. Work to view my autism as a different ability rather than a disability. Look past what you may see as limitations and see the gifts autism has given me. It may be true that I'm not good at eye contact or conversation, but have you noticed that I don't lie, cheat at games, tattle on my friends, or pass judgment on other people? Also, true that I probably won't be the next Michael Jordan, but with my attention to detail and capacity for extraordinary focus, I might be the next Einstein or Mozart or Van Gogh. Christina, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
That was beautiful. I don't even know how I could possibly follow that up, Joe. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, everybody. And thank you, Michelle, Lauren, and Dr. Edmond for sharing your expertise and stories with us. I think that, the chat says it all. People just loved your stories. I think this was one of the most valuable Hungry for Learnings that we've had. And I don't think we could have kicked off this year any better. So thank you so much. And Joe, thank you so much for being a wonderful host as always. He is just such a natural and so great at hosting. So thank you. And I hope that you guys will join us again in the future. This panel was really rich and great. So thank you so much. So NJAMLE does these Hungry for Learnings. We have them scheduled all through the entire year. Usually what we like to do with how these started was we would get together at different restaurants around the state and try to meet in a different setting. However, as you can see, that's not really how we can do it right now. So we do encourage you to bring food, drink to these. You can turn your cameras on, turn them off, have a snack, whatever you're comfortable with. But please, we encourage you to do that because that is the intention of this, is just a very social and informal type of professional development that is really practical and productive. So you will also be receiving, or you might have already received, an email from Eventbrite. In that email, there'll be a survey. Please make sure that you put your correct email address in there. Once you complete the survey, you will receive a certificate. You should get it pretty quickly, but sometimes it takes a while. It's usually pretty quick, but if you don't get it in the next 48 hours or so, please shoot me an email. All my information will be in that Eventbrite email. You should have already received it, but if you did not, keep an eye out for it. Some of our future events, we have March 10th. So we're shooting for the second Wednesday of every month that we will have a different event. So March 10th at 4 p.m., we have Dr. Ineski. He's going to be reviewing the 5 domains of fired up leadership. On April 14th at 4 p.m., we have Tim Carroll, who's a principal in the Indian Mills Middle School, and he will be going over leadership in a time of COVID. May 12th at 4 p.m., we have Kristen Corris, who is actually an educator in Middletown, where Michelle works, and I work too, actually. And it's going to be remote learning tips for people with disabilities. There's a ton more events. They're all going to be in that email, but I just wanted to give you those 3. Registration is open for those, so I look forward to seeing you all there. I encourage you to continue reading and discussing in the chat. I will keep this room open for a while. I'll remain on. Please feel free to stay on, and ask questions, talk together, talk with each other, whatever you prefer. Otherwise, have a great evening, and I look forward to seeing you guys in March.